So I had a random idea last night, and that was, could I potentially get a gasket-mounted case for my Planck? Well, there really isn't anything out there. I think there's an interest check like a year ago for a 4x12 ortho keyboard. There really isn't anything out there at the moment. And of course, I could probably make my own case or source it out to have somebody manufacture it for me. However, that seems like a lot of work and possibly pretty expensive. And now, of course, we all know, it's not like we won't spend that money on a keyboard, even though we said we never would. It's not the most immediate solution. So then the thought crept into my mind, could I redneck engineer something that was close to a gasket-mounted keyboard? And I actually did come up with a couple of solutions that, while someone who is more familiar with gasket-mounted keyboards would probably go, well, that's nothing like a gasket-mounted keyboard. I don't see how that would even be remotely close to a facsimile to one. I think it gets us pretty close to the results we're looking for, while also being pretty cheap, which in this hobby is a nice thing. So the first thing I had to ask myself was, how I was going to do it? Well, the thing with a Planck keyboard is it's a tray-mounted style keyboard, at least with the Rev 6, which are the PCBs that I have. And they are effectively screwed into the bottom of the keyboard. Now, I happen to have a naked Rev 6 keyboard, winky blinky, right here. And we can see here that there are these metal standoffs that you actually screw from the bottom of the keyboard into the PCB. And I actually kind of like this quite a bit. It for me, provides a pretty decent feel. Again, I like a fair amount of stiffness in my keyboard. And I know that there's been a trend of having a softer typing feel, but again, it's just not really my thing. It tends to end up feeling a little mushy. And you might be asking, well, Shifty, why would you even be trying to do a gasket-mounted keyboard then? Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. I'm just going to throw this over here to the side. So that means that underneath that standoff, we're going to have to put something in between it to cause that gasketing effect. That's probably not the right term for it, but I'm going to use that anyway. So the first thing that jumped to my mind, you might already see my solutions here above the keyboard, because these are kind of more hidden here. But the first idea I had was to use foam. I happen to have some foam left over from a dampening project I did. I can't remember if it's like a few months ago or it doesn't really matter. But I happen to have some, I think it's 2mm thick foam, might be 3mm thick. That might just get the job done well. I apologize for all the dog hair. It is in the air. There's not really much I can do about it. So I have this leftover sheet. And then I use this extremely sophisticated tool called a hole punch, which just happens to punch out the right size hole for those standoffs as the first step. And then I took a tiny Allen key and I punched a hole in the center of the washer. Let's see if we can I think we can see that on the camera, for the screw to go through. And then, I'm going to show you here in just a moment how I put these together. I would put that in between the case and the PCB standoff. The next idea I had was I had some of these rubber O-rings from an attempt to silence an RGB Real Force Topra keyboard a few years ago. Now, these really didn't end up being the ultimate solution for that, but I thought they might come in handy at some point. Here we are. At least 6 of them were useful to me. And one of the things with this, one of the advantages I think this gives me over foam, is this is made out of rubber. Now, these are going to deform a lot easier over time. They probably wear out fast. Of course, it's not like it's expensive, and a sheet is going to take you pretty far with the foam. But this might be closer to also what you might be seeing from actual legit gasket-mounted cases instead of the bubbaed up version I'm trying to make here. But it did have 2 issues I was kind of running into. One of them was the thickness. This is something I did on the fly. I didn't order anything for this. I haven't tested 100 materials and different products for it. It's just kind of what I had on hand. And this is, you could probably get something a little bit thinner and pretty much get what you're looking for, but also the size of it. These are just about too big to really be effective. See, if I push really hard on the standoff, this O-ring is going to slide over that standoff. And what you kind of want to have it do is sit right underneath that standoff, for obvious reasons. However, I was able to get it to work. And all 2 of these solutions, I was also able to adjust the tension and compression quite a bit, so I could have it the screws be fairly loose, not loose like they're rattling around, but still have enough tension on them where that keyboard is going to sit pretty firmly. You can't rattle anything in there. And I felt it was pretty effective. So that's enough rambling. Let's go ahead and take a look at installing these options. Then we're going to look at what I would term a squishiness test or compression test, as well as sound tests for each one of these solutions. So as I'm putting in the foam washers, I also want to mention I'm using a Rev 6 Planck with a mid-pro case, as well as an aluminum switch plate. Now, usually I have a beautiful carbon fiber switch plate in there, but I want to make sure I was using pretty stock standard common parts. I'm also using Kalebox Royal switches as well. Okay, now that we have this thing mostly put together, I also you're not going to want to crank down these screws, because if you do that, it's going to depress the material, and then it's not going to get the desired effect. What I'll usually do is keep these screws here pretty loose, and then I will very, if I don't scratch the living hell out of my case, very lightly tighten that screw. Pretty much just finger tight until I'm not getting any more movement from that screw, just like that. And then we're going to do like that. Sometimes it gets a little stiff on the screw because the hole's not quite big enough in the washer. Again, throw it together pretty quickly. And there it is. That is together there. And I'm going to go ahead and splice in some footage of doing my compression test here in just a moment. But which, if you're not bottoming out, then the gasket mount more than likely isn't going to do much for you unless you're using really heavy springs. But we can also see, again, before we get better footage here, that it's doing its job where it's compressing quite a bit. And when you do that, you want to make sure you don't lay it on anything that's going to be touching the bottom, because these screws are going to come up as you're typing, of course, because they're compressing down. But yeah, let's go ahead and take a quick look here at that compression test, and then we'll move on to the sound test. Okay, so now with the case off here, we're going to move over to our O-ring solution. And the way I put those on there is just, I'm going to flip this around. Yeah, let's keep it right here, I think. It's kind of awkward to do on camera with a tripod in between me and the keyboard. It's also what I'm going to blame my shitty typing on. And that's true to a degree. All right, awkward building complete here for the most part. Just going around here and lightly putting some more tension on these screws to make sure that's pretty decently balanced out here. There we go. And there is the O-ring mounting. Now, due to the thickness of the O-rings, it does sit out a little bit further compared to the the foam. And again, that's going to depend on the thickness of the foam versus thickness of the O-rings that you choose there. And with this one, with the size of these O-rings, these are really not made for it. If I really push down hard, they could slip over those standoffs. So you might want to look in something that's a little bit smaller. I thought about trying dental bands, but they're kind of finicky. A little bit too thin. So this is a compression test for an unmodified Planck. To show you what the flex is going to be like in the stock components. I'm also going to include the sound test for the unmodified Planck, the foam modified Planck, as well as the rubber modified Planck. So in case you are interested in this for purely sound reasons, so then you can hear those side by side and see if it's enough of a difference to really justify the effort. So there you have it. That is the redneck engineered gasket mounted Planck solutions. I really don't think it had that much of an effect on the sound, to be honest. I think the foam might have sounded a little bit better to my ears, but again, that's my ears. Of course, I've never really seen the gasket mounting as having a huge effect on the sound, or the sound profile of the keyboard, at least not as much as the switches, the plate, the case, the keycaps themselves, whether or not the switches are lubed or filmed. But what it definitely did have an effect on was typing feel. Now, in my general typing, I didn't notice a difference. I don't have very sensitive hands. I play guitar, so these fingertips are pretty much dead for the most part. But it did get that squishier, softer typing feel, depending on what adjective you want to use for it. And if you got a Planck or a similar style case and you want to give it a try, foam or O-rings seem to do a halfway decent job of getting you, if not all the way there, probably good 80-90% of the way there. And again, like I mentioned, some gasket aficionado will probably go, well, that is nowhere near what it actually feels like. I'm sure. Again, it's just a quick solution I came up with to jerry-rig a case into doing something it wasn't designed for. If this video was at all useful for you, or you happen to find it entertaining for some weird reason, then do feel free to subscribe. I'm going to be covering mostly VR content as well as tiny keyboard content, as well as liking the video. If you want to leave a comment, feel free to do that. You can tell me I suck if you feel like it. That's fine. But with all that said and done, those were 2 ways you could redneck engineer a standard Planck case into a gasket mounted case of sorts. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.